Don't that just smell like heaven? I'm baking especially for you.
The RE Engine era of Resident Evil has been an interesting one that got the series back on track after moving as far away as possible from its roots. A welcome return to its survival horror beginnings. It's not to say they abandoned action altogether. They did experiment with a blending of the two. Of course, we also saw remakes, and more remakes. Ones of varying quality, some much lesser than others. With Requiem and the series' 30th anniversary on the horizon, I want to take a look back on this era of Resident Evil that started with 7. I'll give my thoughts on each title, along with ranking them. To note, I'm only focusing on the single-player titles, not Resistance, not Reverse. Also give my thoughts on the upcoming Requiem with what Capcom's shown so far. Finally, I'll give my thoughts and concerns of the series moving forward. Spoiler alert, one of those concerns involve the rumored future remakes. With that, let's dive in.
Family, son.
Resident Evil 7 was the right game at the right time. It got the series back on track, after drifting about as far away from its roots with Resident Evil 6. Now, I do enjoy RE6. When the game gets out of its own way and lets you enjoy its combat system, it's a blast. But it's an excessive, indulgent affair, one that pushed its action focus to the limits. Far better fit for a spin-off or a whole different IP. But as a mainline RE title, it's very much a series in its identity crisis stage. While it did sell well, it sold below Capcom's expectations. Critical reception was all over the place. I've heard others describe Resident Evil 7 as the game that saved the Resident Evil franchise. Early plans for 7 were to continue with an action-heavy focus. Ones dropped in short order after the release of 6. Now that's an interesting what-if scenario. What would have happened had they continued in the direction of 6? Would it have killed the series dead in its tracks? We'll never know. But I don't see it having the same level of success that they had here. They stripped things back to the very core of what Resident Evil was. Survival horror. Revisiting the game, it still blows my mind with how much they stripped down the game to. Small looping areas to unlock piece by piece, drowning in atmosphere. Where you're planning your next excursion out from an item box, wondering how many open item slots to keep open. Where every bullet and health item counts. There's an interesting shift of having the game not pause when you bring up your inventory, but also giving you the option to heal in real time. Pound for pound, it's the scariest game in the franchise. Isolated away in Louisiana at the Baker estate, it's always such a relief to come across a save room for a brief reprieve. The save theme here is my favorite in the series. A little glimmer of hope that also reminds you that you have to head back out into danger at some point. For the first time in the mainline series, RE7 goes first person. It's not new to the series. The first series spin-off Survivor made use of it, others did as well. They wanted to make the original Resident Evil first person, but tech limitations got in the way. Fixed camera angles became a bit of a happy accident that defined the series. But at last, almost 21 years after the first game, a mainline RE title goes first person. A fitting shift for the game's protagonist, a newcomer, Ethan Winters. He's not some special ops combat expert like past protagonists. He's your everyman citizen. Very much a blank slate with minimal backstory, at least at first. That said, he does have his endearing moments with his attitude to the situation around him.
And that thing on your wrist is a codex. Don't lose it. It's important.
Hell of a girl.
He's but a simple man who came to the Baker residence to find his wife Mia, presumed dead for the last 3 years. Speaking of the Bakers, Capcom struck gold with them. That cutscene with Jack, Marguerite, and Lucas at the table in the beginning stretch is iconic. One of the best moments in the series, letting us know what we're up against here.
Where's Mia?
Eat it. It's good.
Dumb some bitch wasn't no good if it hit him.
Yes.
You're not too bad, Margaret. Hit boy's got to eat. He got to have his supper.
They make the most of their screen time, but always left me wanting more. Something that Village would struggle with as well. The game's first stretch in the main house is the game at its best. A small looping stretch of having to deal with Jack popping up at the worst of times. Then you discover the basement and things get even worse. I find the fight against Marguerite in the greenhouse to be the game's highlight, especially on the game's hardest difficulty, Madhouse. Making every shot count, whittling down her health, while keeping an eye on mine. The tension relief I felt reminded me of the first time I made my way through the water hall in Resident Evil 4.
Poor Evie's gonna be heartbroken.
The game does take a bit of a tumble quality-wise after her fight. The stretch dealing with Lucas, the son of the family, has its moments, like using the knowledge you've gained from the VHS tape to solve his escape room puzzle. It's too bad none of the other puzzles in the base game match up to it, for the rest are quite ho-hum. Most 7's more noticeable flaws is the lack of enemy variety. The molded are interesting the first time you see them. Seeing them over and over with little variety, not so much. The game also felt like it could have used another difficulty setting. Something between normal and Madhouse mode. One that you didn't need to unlock at first. Something that offered limited saves and cut back on checkpoints for higher tension. More akin to the Resident Evil of old. Normal feels a bit too straightforward. It doesn't do much to pressure you for limited inventory slots. Madhouse can go overboard at points, leading to great deals of frustration. We have to try a section over and over. Adding to that frustration is the lack of skipping cutscenes without installing mods. Something that future titles didn't suffer from. While the intro does a great job building tension, on replays it's a bit of a drag. I wish more survival horror games would do like the original Clock Tower or Amnesia the Bunker do, allow you to skip the preludes upon another playthrough. Imagine if you had the option to start RE7 at the table scene for future playthroughs. Resident Evil 7 made some smart choices to how it tackled the story. Keeping it a self-contained affair before tying it to the world at large during the end stretch was the right choice. For how bloated the series' lore became, it was a nice reset to something more straightforward. There was a great layer of tragedy to learning about the Bakers, how they used to be and how they became after the mold. You also have the wildcard element of Mia, living a double life hidden away from her husband Ethan, her connection to the crime syndicate known as the Connections and the role she played in what happened at the Baker estate. Trying to set things right for them and for Ethan. With what happens here, how does that bode for her future? Something they bring up in Village, but also felt like they dropped the ball on. And the plot does stumble in some notable ways. Like the choice of saving Mia, Ethan's wife, or Zoe Baker, the daughter who's been helping us. It was something added later in development. Choice that does have story changes, but not much on the gameplay front. They added it to give more input from the player for making a critical decision. Good in theory, execution's lacking. It feels half-baked and should have remained on the cutting room floor. There's also the elements of Evelyn and how the mold infection works that can be quite vague at points. The ship and the mines are lackluster sections that pale in comparison to earlier stretches. The base game ends up limping across the finish line after such a strong earlier stretch. But the DLC makes up for it, and more. Quality and quantity-wise, there's much to enjoy here. It gave them a chance to get more experimental in tone and gameplay. You have something more action-focused like the Not a Hero DLC or the addictive Ethan Must Die, with roguelike elements of piecing together that perfect run. One highlight of the DLC is the bedroom scenario from the banned footage DLC, one that dials up on puzzles that the base game lacked. But there's a twist to it. You have short stretches of solving puzzles before Marguerite comes back to check in on you. Make sure everything was in its place as before, or Marguerite won't be too happy. There's great tension as she's looking around the room, and you're second-guessing yourself if you put everything back in its right place.
Huh? Has someone been in here? Oh, something ain't right. Well, everything seems in order. I figured you still hadn't eaten yet, so I brought something else for you.
While 7 could be the series at its darkest and most grim at points, it still has welcome splashes of humor and cheese. Some in the base game, but more so in the DLC. Like Jack's 55th birthday or the best offering of the DLC's End of Zoe. Playing as Joe Baker, Jack's brother, you make your way through the swamps beating molded and alligators to pulps with your fists. Ending off with a fist fight against Jack in the main house of the Bakers. It's goofy, B-movie cheese the series built its name off of. Something present in the base game, but here it's up front and center.
Charge complete.
You remember me, right? You remember when I clotheslined you into the swamp?
Charge complete.
So while it does have some notable flaws and issues, Resident Evil 7 was a return to form by going back to the series' roots. There were tweaks along the way, like switching to the first-person perspective and more of a blank slate protagonist. It pushed the action focus as far as they could with 6, made the right call of returning to a survival horror focus, something that audiences would agree with. Looking at recent sales numbers, Resident Evil 7 has sold almost 16 million copies. It's the third best-selling game in the franchise. Resident Evil 5 in second place is a smidge over 16 million. Do also consider the fact 5 came out 8 years before. In first place for sales, that would be the next title after Resident Evil 7, one that also took a survival horror first approach. But instead of a new entry, it was a remake of a beloved classic.
Leon, we really gotta stop meeting like this.
Resident Evil 2 Remake is one of the best remakes out there. No, it doesn't reach the highs of the original Resident Evil remake, a game which, depending on what day of the week you ask me, is the best game ever. It's not as good as the original Resident Evil 2. It's missing a decent chunk of material from the original game and loses some of the spirit. But when it's firing on all cylinders, it's a phenomenal experience. The best the RE Engine era has to offer, and the most replayable. Unlike the remake of 1, there's a perspective shift. Gone are the fixed camera angles. Hello, over-the-shoulder perspective. Now, fixed camera will always be the superior experience for survival horror. They take more control away from the player and allow the developers to craft better tension and scares. 2 Remake does the conventional modern approach by making environments darker to make up for it. Ones that games can overplay and never quite has the same impact as quality fixed cameras. That said, this remake does a fantastic job of making the shift in perspective and tweaks to the layout. The police station has a similar layout, but enough changes here and there to keep you on your toes. Unlike 7, it's great that you can access the game's hardest difficulty, hardcore, from the very start. By far the best way to play the game. Ink ribbons for saves, fewer resources, enemies are vicious and damage dealt. While the game opens up more with item pouches as it progresses, those early stretches have you fighting for every inventory slot. The moment-to-moment decision making is far more in line with the fixed camera era of Resident Evil. How much longer will that boarded window stay up? Should I kill this zombie or run by them? How many slots should I leave open for when I head out? Should I save now? Unlocking the station piece by piece, key by key, room by room. When you get into that flow, it's a fantastic experience. There are some additions and tweaks that pull from the RE1 remake and RE3 Nemesis, like how sub-weapons handle. You have access to knives and grenades to use when you want. But if an enemy grabs you, if you have a sub-weapon on hand, you have the choice to expend one and not receive damage. Something that can make the difference between life and death. Of course, there are consequences to this. They're not as effective when used this way. If you use a knife, you'll have to kill that enemy to regain the knife after. It's one of those great split-second decisions that add so much to the game. Pulling from Nemesis, you can find gunpowder to craft different ammo types, giving you more flexibility in your choice of ammo. Of course, you have to consider is now the time to craft, or wait until you have something better. As well, do you even have enough slots to take the gunpowder now, or something you'll have to come back to at a later time? The remake of 2 does a great job of its integration of zombies. There are erratic movements that can be tough to bait out if you're trying to evade them. Is it better to fill this one with lead, or take a risk and juke them out? There's some interesting elements going on behind the scenes with enemies. This will vary depending on difficulty. Zombies have varying levels of health. For example, in the morgue, that one by the door has a ridiculous level of HP. There's an RNG factor when it comes to critical hits with headshots. Depending on how well you're playing, your damage output will vary. There's more leeway given to players on the lower difficulty. Now this can be frustrating at points. Some zombies can take forever to go down when you are better off running past them. That inconsistency can rear its ugly head at moments that can create more moments of frustration than tension. That said, I didn't find it to be a major detriment when it comes to adding to the game's tension. For the Tyrant, or Mr. X, more than makes up for it.
Why won't he just stay down?
The usage of Mr. X is the game's crowning achievement. The pursuer enemy is nothing new in the series. At times, the encounters with Jack Baker in 7 felt like as a test run for how they would integrate Mr. X here. He loves to show up at those moments when things aren't going your way. The last thing you want to hear when your health is in danger territory, you're of healing items, and nowhere near an item box are the footsteps of Mr. X. There's a disorienting music track that kicks in and the tension dials up to 11. All your best laid plans you had on your route can now go up in smoke in an instant. I'm sure we've all felt the pain of trying to move the bookshelves in the library with him hot on our heels. Although a funny thing happened to me when capturing footage for the video. I could hear him in the distance, but moving the library bookshelves was a tyrant-free experience for whatever reason. The stretches for both Leon and Claire's campaign up until the character switches, phenomenal. Oh so replayable, always a blast. When I reinstalled the game to capture more footage, I played way longer than intended. But the game does stumble with the Ada and Sherry interludes. Especially Sherry. I never want to hear doors locked ever again. Sorry, let me try that pronunciation again. Doors locked.
It's all over now! Doors locked!
The sewer in the labs are a step down from the police station, but you could say the same for the OG RE2. They're not bad, but they're not the same bar of quality. At least the puzzles are much better than 7. I love that little chime of solving a portable safe puzzle. On the plot elements, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Not as bad as other modern remakes, and much better than the ones that would follow in the series here. There is less of the B-movie feel and more of an action blockbuster, which does lose some of that charm of the original. Claire's excessive swearing does get tiresome, but they still did a great job of her moving heaven and earth to help Sherry. I love her dorkiness coming out when she's around Leon.
I'm guessing you don't have a key in one of those fancy pockets?
Unfortunately, no. But how are you doing?
You know, just surviving.
That's good.
For Leon, he's still got that feeling of that bright-eyed rookie cop put into a tight spot. Coming back after the remake of 4, it's so nice to hear Ada with an actress who actually fit like a glove.
I told you to get out of here. You wouldn't want to end up like Ben, would you?
You know him?
He was an informant. Had information of use to my investigation.
So what he said was true? Hey, you can't keep walking away from me. I don't even know your name. I'm Leon Kennedy.
Find a way out, Leon. Before it's too late. Then we'll talk. Name's Ada.
I did like how they gave Marvin a bit more screen time before he succumbs to his fate. Chief Irons is a notable downgrade. He's far less creepy unsettling and much more of a mustache twirler. But if we're talking downgrades, none are as egregious as the A-B scenarios. In the original, you had 4 campaigns. Leon's campaign was different if you played Claire's first, and vice versa. The game used what's known as the zapping system. I don't know why they use that term, but that's just what they did, of things that would carry over from one to the other. Story beats played out in different ways. What do we have in the remake of 2? Well, no zapping system. There's a quote-unquote scenario in which you play the other character after completion of the other. There are some differences, but it's a mishmash of things cobbled together. Story elements clash with one another, like it's something thrown together during the final lap of development, which does seem to be the case. There was an interview with some of the higher-ups about 6 months before the game's release. They said they wanted to have a more efficient way of having players see everything. They wanted to cut down on repetition. That was the reason for this choice of not having the A-B campaign, which I can understand to an extent. But come on, this system was one of the original's defining characteristics. What made the original RE2 so replayable? It seems they found themselves caught flat-footed with fan response to this, and added in the quote-unquote B scenario at the last minute. I understand that game development is far more complex than it was back when they developed the OG RE2, but still, it was such a core component of what made the game what it was. It's too bad because barring a few stretches here, both Leon and Claire's campaign are great. Airtight pacing with high levels of replayability. But imagine how much more they could have offered with B scenarios when they built the game from the ground up. Ones like the original. Before wrapping up here, I do also want to talk about this game's impact on the industry, and the series at whole. Resident Evil 2 Remake is the best-selling game in the series at 16.3 million copies as of late September 2025. There's only a couple of other Capcom games that have outsold it, both Monster Hunter titles. While not the only title responsible, the success of Resident Evil 2 Remake has resulted in more gaming remakes. A trend I'm very much not a fan of. Not as egregious as excessive live service games, broken game launches, consumer unfriendly practices that plague the industry, but remakes do play a major role in the stagnation of creativity and originality in the industry. Now, I do get it. AAA gaming has astronomical game budgets. They want to save for return on investment. If you've seen how well Resident Evil has done with their remakes, why wouldn't others follow in their steps? Especially in the realm of horror. Look at Silent Hill taking a crack at it with the Silent Hill 2 remake, and more on the way. Or Dead Space making a return with a remake. Or Fatal Frame 2 getting the remake treatment. Well, mind you, this is the game's second remake. It already had a remake on the Wii over a decade back. I'm still waiting for the day that Capcom announces another remake of the original Resident Evil, to which I'll have a laugh and weep at what the game industry has become. But before I laugh and weep about the next remake in the series, RE2 Remake is a fantastic game. Not as good as the original, and the cut content does sting, but it stands on its own 2 feet and offers a rock-solid experience. Some of the best survival horror in the series since its original heyday. And if you haven't checked it out, do give the fixed camera mod a spin. It's staggering how much love and care seeps through it. While not perfect, as the game is built around the over-the-shoulder perspective, it's a great way of experiencing the game in a new way. When it's firing on all cylinders, it's the best the RE engine era of Resident Evil has to offer. Can't say the same about the remake of 3.
Well, you can thank your corporate overlords for that.
While the content cuts of RE2 Remake was disappointing, they are nowhere in the same ballpark as the remake of 3. It cuts a ridiculous amount of content from the original. Locations, enemies, gameplay mechanics. What's left feels like a glorified DLC. It's a bummer with how much of a downgrade it is compared to the remake of 2. There are elements that the game does well. The dodging mechanic from the original shows up here and integrated in a good way. Thanks to a shift in controls, you don't have to worry about dodging over and over when you mean to shoot like in the original. I did enjoy getting to spend time in Jill's apartment during the game's intro. You get a good sense of her state of mind between now and the events at the Spencer Mansion. But that all flies out the window, both from a literal and figurative standpoint, as Nemesis comes barging in. No build-up like the original. He doesn't even kill Brad this time around.
Hello?
Jill, are you okay?
Brad, is that you?
Listen, you gotta get out of there.
What are you talking about?
I don't have time to explain. You gotta get out of there right now.
All right, let me grab my...
This one parking rooftop scene with the helicopter always puzzled me. You have a setup here of establishing Nemesis as a threat by having him destroy the helicopter. Arctic it out here. But no, the helicopter crashes because... reasons? Was this the doing of Nikolai? Nemesis comes across as a goober here compared to the sheer threat he was in the original. It doesn't help that after Jill's apartment, we play a game of on-rails runaway as he fails to stop us. Beyond the cut content, the sheer mishandling of Nemesis is baffling. He's one of the best elements of the original game. Depending on how you played, especially in early game stretches, he may or may not show up in spots. Some places he'll always pop by. There's a bit of an illusion going on here giving the feeling he shows up at random. But that's what made him so great. Beyond a few stretches, he was always a threat. With how the remake of 2 handled the Tyrant, this felt like the perfect place for the Pursuer system to shine. The development team mentioned the handling of Mr. X inspired them to step up their game. To which I ask, what game was that? Because I sure didn't play it. Nemesis more or less boils down to scripted chase scenes that aren't bad, but nothing special. There's none of those dynamic moments like Tyrant chasing you popping up at the worst moments like in the remake of 2. Now it's not all bad. The fights against him can be decent. I enjoyed the one against him outside the clock tower. They made decent use of the game mechanics to build an engaging fight. As mentioned earlier when I reinstalled 2 Remake to get footage for this video, I played way longer than planned. Here I played up into the sewers and used other footage I had lying around. No desire to keep going. The first stretch downtown is the best, as par for the course in the series. There's elements of the area looping itself around. What would have been a perfect idea to expand on and have a dynamic Nemesis at play could have worked. But no, we funnel through into more linear stretches. The game cuts away most of what made the original 3 great. Bosses like the Gravedigger? Absent. Locations like the park or the clock tower, which we do see, we don't enter. The cutting of the clock tower, one of the more egregious cuts. Another egregious cut is the removal of the live selection system. Choices that would pop up and change your path forward. Something integrated in the original for replayability due to the game only having one playable character. The developers thought about including it here, but like many things, cut it out. They did so for a more consistent story, and besides, they bundled the game with RE Resistance. That will make up for it for sure. Oh wait, same case goes for Mercenaries mode. Not there as well. Other bizarre changes include Carlos and Tyrell visiting the police station instead of Jill. Why not have her go there like the original? She has a history with the place and could have been interesting to hear some of her thoughts while she was there. That also would have made the moment with Brad have greater impact. While I preferred his death in the original to Nemesis, him being a zombie and biting Marvin, that really did add a layer of tragedy to Marvin's story. Speaking of tragedies, another tragedy is the handling of our heroine, Miss Supercop herself, Jill Valentine. She's all over the place here in how she behaves. All those pills and her constant nightmares that we witnessed in the beginning at her apartment, yeah, that more or less doesn't come up afterward. She also suffers from the same issue as Remake Claire of having the excessive potty mouth. You can use swears to great effect, but you have to keep it in check. Here, it loses any sense of weight with their overuse. And that late 90s action girl feel of Jill from the original, the Jill with a bit of sass but a kind heart, pops out here and there, but most of the game she comes across as unlikable. I get she's not in the best state of mind. She's not thrilled with the UBCS and working with them, but it's hard to get on board with her with how she behaves. Some real I like to speak to her manager energy here.
Alright, Super Cop. Here you go. We can use this to stay in contact.
I know what a radio is.
This does soften up as the game goes on, but still a far cry from the Jill of the past. While I had issues with the game's plot, the remake of 2 did a decent job with their versions of Claire and Leon. Wish I could say the same about Jill here. And moving the iconic "You Want Stars" line to an earlier game stretch instead of the ending is another head scratcher.
Come on, you creepy ass stalker! You want stars? I'll give you stars!
That said, other characters fare better, like Carlos. While he deviates away from his original iteration, he still has some of that attitude intact and that charm. Props to the actor for making that cold, cruel, Carlos-less world line work. It's a line full of cheese that could have been an eye roller, but he makes it work somehow. No wonder they brought the actor back to play Chris in Village.
It's alright, you go on ahead. I'm not gonna die on you, leave you in a cold, cruel, Carlos-less world.
Okay.
Nikolai gets more into mustache-twirling villain territory here, but you know what? Unlike Chief Irons, it does work. You can tell the actor is having a blast with the role. Makes sense why they brought him back to play Heisenberg in Village and dial up that mustache twirling to 11.
Why is she here?
She's helping get the trains running again.
Bad time to start getting dead weight for. She's unreliable. Can't pull the trigger when it counts.
I remember for months, even years after release, people were hoping for some DLC or a director's cut of this game. We'll get to see the clock tower in all its glory. But no, instead the game just feels like a glorified DLC. 3 Remake is a game that could have used far more time in the oven. There was a solid core here, but it strips back what made the original a great entry in the series. Now this remake wasn't as much of a priority compared to 2. This game saw greater outsourcing to external developers and Capcom subsidiaries. Capcom's internal team took more of a supervisor role as they focused on the remake of 2. They were going to take a similar approach with the remake of 4, but due to numerous factors, no doubt 3 Remake's critical reception being one of them, Capcom took a more hands-on role for the remake of 4. While it does have its deviations, the remake of 4 was much more in line content-wise to its original. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. There was another game between the remake of 3 and 4. A new entry continuing the story of Ethan Winters.
Lycans and gentlemen, we thank you for waiting. And now let the games begin! Let's see what you have. Ethan Winters. Get ready.
Building from the foundation of 7, Village gets more experimental with its approach. The team wanted to combine the survival horror elements of 7 with more action-heavy approach of 4. To an extent, they succeeded. Some areas more so than others. But this change did lead to some of 7's stronger elements fading more into the background. I've mellowed out on my thoughts on Village as time passed. I did at the time prefer it over 7, but that's now changed. It's more middle of the pack for me with regard to the RE Engine era. While that sentiment also holds for the entire series. Village is much grander in its scope and its size. The village serving as a bit of a hub between the 4 areas to deal with the 4 lords of Mother Miranda. Some of my favorite stretches were exploring the village in peace. Well, most of the time. There was always that tension in the air and things would go bump in the night. Unlocking it piece by piece, having the time of day change and new enemies appear as we make our way through the 4 lords was all great stuff. Areas like the factory did a great job of blending those elements of looping level design with a more action-based approach. Castle made use of the Pursuer to keep you on your toes. There are changes to resource management to favor the more action-heavy approach of 4. No more item boxes. Not all items take up inventory slots. Crafting items are separate. The game once again pauses when you open up your inventory. So if you want, you can save your crafting items until you need them for a healing item or ammo. You don't quite have that luxury in the past couple of titles as crafting items fought for inventory slots. This can remove quite a bit of tension, unless you have self-imposed constraints. They could have had crafting be in real time, or do the crafting approach from the Evil Within 2. You could craft in game, but it costs far more resources while compared to a bench. To push for a more survival horror approach, you could have gone back to the Duke to craft with fewer resources. Would have made for some more decision making, which gets pushed further back to focus on the action. Of course, there's other decision making in its stead, like the Duke and all the possible upgrades through the store via currency. Village does have a few cases of what I found to be over course correction, like scaling back on the horror elements. In those charming puppet videos they did for the game's marketing, they talked about scaling back on 7's horror due to feedback.
この番組は怖すぎた前作の反省を受けて制作しました。5月2日より体験版が期間限定で配信されるわよ。
楽しみだね。
体験してくれなきゃドミとお姉さんがあなたの体液を吸っちゃうかもよ。
吸いたいわ。それじゃあみんなバイバイよ。
Now, it's not like they dialed it back altogether, the House Beneviento section being a standout, a short stretch that takes more cues from psychological horror, a bit of a rarity for the series. One that took me for surprise the first time around. But across the game as a whole, they did dial it down, which was a bit of a letdown with how well they did with 7's horror. But I also felt like they over-course corrected with the pursuer elements. The castle showed plenty of promise, but Lady Dimitrescu and the daughters didn't put up much of a challenge. All those oh crap moments like with Mr. X are dialed back here. But felt like they didn't want to frustrate the player too much. But I'm sure no one would have minded having Lady D pop up more often. You have to think Capcom was kicking themselves over the response to her and her daughters leading up to release. They could have been like the Bakers and been a thorn in our side the entire game. Instead, they're gone from the equation far too early. But it was quite amusing to see how they captured the attention of the gaming landscape, and still do.
Oh, be careful what you wish for, Ethan Winters.
Wait, what are you doing?
While not to the same extent, I do love Heisenberg and his over-the-top theatrics. They told the actor playing him to channel Nicolas Cage, and bless them for that choice. I can't be the only one who started saying Miranda as Miranda after playing Village.
Lady, supersized bitch. Ugly ass psycho doll. An moronic freak. Don't you get it? It's a test. To see if you're strong enough to be a part of Miranda's family.
I don't want to be a part of Miranda's family.
Neither did I, but here we are!
Funny that while a late game stretch, the factory is one of the better areas of the game. Too bad Heisenberg wasn't hunting us down throughout. While Village does get more out there and sillier compared to 7, it does lose some of that consistent tone. The section with Morrow is Despite her large role in the series lore, Mother Miranda, or Miranda, wasn't that compelling of a villain. The story has its moments, but could be quite wonky at points. Chris acting like an idiot at points to advance the plot is a big detriment to the story. There's a late game call-up by one of Chris's crew about not telling Ethan about the plan that feels like the writer realizing the mistake they made earlier. The molded twist with Ethan was interesting. The clues were there from the previous game. It's a neat way of tying gameplay elements to its story with how Ethan was able to piece himself back together. His endgame sacrifice and his goodbye to his daughter Rose was a touching moment, although it borders on the point of hilarity with how much Capcom hides his face, even with the later addition of a third-person mode. There was a moment to show Ethan's face. His death was the moment. As well, it's puzzling Mia herself is not there for his death. Beyond the flashback, she and Ethan don't have any time together here. Despite what she told the BSAA about the connections, she still has some things hidden up her sleeve. It would be interesting to see her pop up in the upcoming Requiem, but I'm not holding out hope. Especially after the Shadows of Rose DLC, where we play as Rose Winters, now grown up. One that has its moments, but it's a bit of a letdown compared to the DLC we got for 7. Both on the quality and quantity front. It limps a bit across the finish line to what looks to be the end of the Winter saga of Resident Evil, unless Rose or Mia pop up again in the future. As a blending of 7 and 4, Village is a good entry to the series, but one I found to be more in the middle of the pack. While it kept much of that foundation at 7, it did feel like it drifted a bit too much away from my liking when it comes to survival horror. With what I've seen of Requiem, it does seem like they're steering more towards a horror-based direction again, which is great, but as of writing, that is yet to release. We have one more entry to cover here. Another remake, and one I hope is the last of them, that Capcom's finally got their remakes out of their system.
Great.
Sorry, didn't realize that was yours. I am flattered, but I'm a one-lady type of guy.
Like Village, the remake of 4 is another title I've changed my thoughts on with the passage of time, one I mellowed out on more. When I reviewed it after release, I consider it the best of the RE Engine era, something that's no longer the case. It's clear they took the remake of 3's criticism to heart with their all-hands-on-deck approach. It makes tweaks and adjustments to keep things fresh and keep you guessing. It does have issues with its tonal shifts and cut content like the other remakes, but ones I found less egregious. That said, I don't ever see any scenario where I'd ever decide to replay this as opposed to the original. A game that, depending on what day of the week you ask me, is the greatest game ever made, or Resident Evil 1 Remake, or Deus Ex. Compare that to the Resident Evil 2 Remake. We had a shift from fixed camera to over the shoulder. Major overhaul, so it feels much more like its own thing. For the remake of 4, the original 4 is one of those template setters that's still used to this day. So there's nowhere near the gap between the two in differences. In many ways, it's how the game handles where it falters compared to the original. Like the shift away from the airtight arcade approach. Instead, it plays in line with the remake of 2 and 3. More sloppy, for lack of a better term. Leon doesn't stop on a dime like he did in the original. He has that inertia before stopping. The remake of 4 does pull elements from the other remakes with regard to the knife, with some tweaks, like how you could use it to get yourself out of a pinch at a cost of durability. You have more options with the knife, like through upgrading along with the parry. One of the major issues I have here with the gameplay changes is the inconsistent staggers. In the original, you always knew what would happen with a well-placed head or limb shot. That's not the case here. Now, the approach worked fine in the remakes of 2 to 3 with its more methodical approach, and they did take a more methodical approach here compared to its source material, but it loses much of that arcade feel the original delivered in droves, which you can get to an extent in Mercenaries mode. Here, those well-placed shots will always stagger. That said, there's still more ambiguity for the crowd clearing of melee follow-ups with how you will stagger them. It's not bad by any stretch, but still a step down from the original. One that's always a joy to fire up and mow down Ganados. You always knew what your attacks would do. Here they go for a bit of a compromise to something more methodical. There's other various tweaks to the formula, like the opening of instant killing an enemy with a knife before they spawn a Las Plagas, or the addition of crafting items, which unlike Village, takes up inventory slots. I did like the changes to the treasure and gem system. The way you can multiply the currency for selling depending on what colored gems you used added a layer of decision making to the process. Speaking of colors, let's talk about everyone's favorite color. In paint form, to be clear. Going through the games again for this video, it was interesting to see how prior titles used yellow to guide the player. Yellow police tape or yellow tape on boxes and barrels. Ones that grabbed your attention, helped things stand out, but didn't feel out of place or immersion breaking. I guess Sadler or Salazar here had a thing for yellow paint with it splashed all over the place here. No rhyme or reason beyond guiding the player. As if they forgot how to use elements such as light to guide the player. Now, it's not the only game to do this, but the game's become a bit of a talking point, a catalyst for bringing up design issues with regard to readability and player navigation. Something that's become a bit of a hot topic and fun to poke fun at.
That's true, there was no yellow paint. That's why I was so lost. I played so many games with the yellow paint recently. The fact this one doesn't have it, I'm so confused. I've been, programmed to expect the yellow paint to tell me where to go. This is what modern gaming has done to me.
While the remake of 4 is more in line with the original compared to 2 or 3, it still makes some disappointing tweaks and cuts. They dialed up on the grim factor and cut back on the humor. Funny to note, in an interview, the actor for Leon mentioned they didn't have the bingo line in the original script. When filming, he threw the idea out there and that's what they went with. Sometimes, can't mess with perfection. I did enjoy the dynamic between Leon and Ashley. While they take a different tone and approach, execution was good. I did like how they put more emphasis and weight on Las Plagas growing within them. It's not like all humor's lost. The shooting range delivers that in droves. Luis getting more screen time is a welcome addition. I always felt he exited stage right far too early in the original. But poor Ada. As mentioned earlier, such a sharp contrast between her performance in the remake of 2 and what we got here. Like Ada, there's a notable downgrade with the villains. It's criminal that they took away Salazar's iconic hat and the Mecha Salazar chase. Although I didn't mind the choice of moving the throne-sitting scene to the castle instead of the island. I always found it to be a bit of an odd location in the original to have that. Gone are the fun radio conversations with Salazar and Sadler bantering with Leon. Sadler gets far less screen time and a bit more one note this time around. Same goes for Krauser. Gone are the boss transformations into their monster forms, and while there are no more QTEs, which is fine with me, gone are most of those memorable gruesome death scenes the original delivered in droves. They shifted around some elements for the Separate Ways DLC instead of having it in the main campaign. Reasonable DLC, and Mercenaries has its fun. Still, I don't ever see myself ever replaying the remake of 4 when I could just play the original. As mentioned, remake of 2, different enough to stand on its own, but the original 4 set a standard that's still used to this day. So while the remake of 4 is a good game, much more of an unnecessary one. I don't blame Capcom for remaking it considering its original reputation. I can only hope moving forward this is it as far as remakes go, that they've got it out of their system. Although, hold that thought for now. Before giving my thoughts on the upcoming Requiem and the future of the franchise, let's rank the 5 RE Engine titles. I'm curious to hear your rankings below. Starting at number 5, no surprises here, Resident Evil 3 Remake. There's a foundation of something decent here. It's too bad it didn't have another year or so of development and didn't slice and dice out so much content. It's down there with mainline titles like Zero or Code Veronica, where I don't have much interest in revisiting. Number 4, the remake of 4. Which is fine to slot here as I felt was the best RE Engine title at the time when I played it. The passage of time clears all heads. It's a good game, but as mentioned, there's little reason to replay it when the original exists. There's some nice tweaks here and there, but that arcade-heavy approach to the original will always reign supreme. Number 3 is Village, a bit middle of the pack, both in this list and the series at large. I did go back and forth between ranking this or 4 Remake higher, but I'll give the nod to an original title. It's got its moments, and it's an interesting blend of the methodical exploration with more action, but strays a bit too far from the survival horror focus for my liking. It's more experimental than 7, but does lose a bit of that cohesion and consistency, which leads to number 2 of the RE Engine era, Resident Evil 7. I did go back and forth between this and the remake of 2. 7 got the series back on track. I love the setting and the greater focus on horror and atmosphere. I love the sheer variety of fun and extra game modes and DLC offers, more so than the others in this list. But it does suffer quite the large drop in its later stretch, something that's common to the series, but this one is one of the more egregious cases of it. Leaving us at number 1 of the RE Engine titles, 2 Remake, which again, it's a bummer losing out on the B scenarios. There's some tone, plot, and character shifts I don't gel with. The game's later stretches aren't as good as the police station, which again, same case as the original, and not as good as the original, but that stretch in the police station with Mr. X hunting you down as you're at war with your resource management, your item slots, and other enemies, sheer bliss. I could replay the stretch over and over and have a blast each time. It's a fantastic blend of survival horror while taking a modern big budget approach. With that, let's take a look at Requiem. They're bumping up the horror once again, something they mentioned in interviews and apparent with what they've shown so far. You can see that through our heroine, Grace Ashcroft. She's not some combat expert. She's a technical analyst for the FBI. Very much a scaredy cat. Seems like a bit of a dork. Look at her wearing shoes on the bed. Why'd you let that slide, Alyssa? Speaking of Alyssa Ashcroft, what a random throwback to the Outbreak series. I'm all for it. Glad to see Capcom acknowledges that it exists. Here's to hoping Grace tells someone to calm down, little sister.
Just do it! Hey!
On the topic of Outbreak, please Capcom, some port to modern systems would be great. You can play it online through emulation thanks to passionate fans, but you have to jump through several hurdles to get the game up and running to work online. I do recall seeing a decomp project on the game, so here's to hoping something comes of that. In one of the dev diaries, they talked about using Leon as a character, but decided against it. Why would Leon by now be afraid of anything? It would go against the horror focus, which I can understand. There are rumors that he will appear in the game. Whether that's the case or not, we'll have to see. Returning to Raccoon City is something I'm surprised the game hasn't done so sooner. It's been almost 30 years since those missile strikes on the city. Hey, it gives them a chance to reuse assets. Wouldn't surprise me if we see other familiar faces return. Chris, Jill, Claire. I haven't had an issue moving the series forward with new characters, but Capcom, please, give these older ones a send-off. These beloved characters need a nice ride out into the sunset to close off their stories, instead of having them disappear for games at a time without a word. I do hope they bump up on the inventory and resource management, something more akin to the games of old. 7 didn't go hard enough in that direction. The remake of 2 did demonstrate that they're still great at it. Give me more of that. Give me my looping levels and a constant war for my inventory slots. Watching some gameplay demos, I am a bit concerned Grace is going to yap too much. Her scared breathing is more than enough. She's less of a blank slate than Ethan, and more of a scaredy cat, but over-talkative player characters is something that needs to die off. Returning to Raccoon City also feels like an ending point for this era of Resident Evil. So what's to come after the game's release? Well, there's a series 30th anniversary not long after Requiem's release. They've been dripping things out as we approach that big 3-0.
It's almost Resident Evil's 30th anniversary. And to celebrate, Resident Evil and Baby Metal we'll be releasing collaborative goods.
30 years. Crazy to think about. And the series shows no signs of slowing down. Look at those sales numbers, my goodness. But I do have concerns moving forward. One main concern is the continuation of remakes. There's been rumors for years now about titles like Code Veronica, 0, and 5 getting remakes. As mentioned earlier, I'm still waiting for the day we hear about the first Resident Evil getting a second remake. There's been more concrete evidence as of late pointing to more remakes. One voice actor mentioned Project Chamber on their resume as an upcoming AAA game release. They worked with Beyond Capture Studios on the project, a studio Capcom has worked with on the remakes. The name like Project Chamber, well, Rebecca Chambers pops to mind. Now, I'm all for Rebecca to show up once again in the series. Like the others, she needs a nice send-off, but I'd rather have her showing up in a new game than a remake of one of the worst mainline titles. Now, one common argument I see for remakes is, well, it gives them a chance to make a lesser game better. Which, sure, you could do, but you know what they could have done with that time instead? You could make a new game in that time. Make a new entry in the series. If you look at sales numbers, 7 and Village only sit behind the remake of 2 of the RE Engine output. Now, there are release date differences, having been on the market longer, but it's not like the new entries aren't slacking sales-wise. I get it, remakes reduce the risk when you're making these large investments, but do you think it's worth spending all this time and resources on ho-hum entries like 0 and Code Veronica? Imagine if they gave those teams a chance to work on a spin-off title. And no, not multiplayer titles, not a live service title. I want to see a return of those single-player spin-off entries in the series. Whatever happened to that rumored Revelations 3 with Rebecca? Revelations 2 ended with quite the cliffhanger that they've never addressed. Although drop plot threads are nothing new for the series. Make a new game bringing back characters that have vanished for several games. Bring back Sheva, Carlos, Sherry, Jake, whoever. Or give these teams a chance to work on something else altogether with what they've learned. Capcom still puts out new IPs. Why not give these teams a chance to build a new horror IP with what they've learned? That could lead to a new franchise to add to your portfolio. But if the remakes keep selling well, which they are, why not continue? Which does also lead to my other concern of how Capcom handles and treats the back catalog of Resident Evil. A lesser issue, but one to make note of. GOG released the OG trilogy earlier this year, something they had to push hard for when talking with Capcom. The higher-ups at Capcom said that the remakes are the superior experiences. I would love for one of those higher-ups to sit down, play through the original RE3, then the remake, look me straight in the eye, and tell me the remake is the superior experience. No way. But guess what? The OG trilogy sold well on GOG, far beyond their expectations. No doubt playing a role in the titles coming to the PlayStation Store earlier this year. Now, I will give Capcom credit, to an extent, when it comes to the access of the back catalog of Resident Evil. Beyond Code Veronica, you can get every mainline title on PC. Varies a bit more when it comes to consoles, but still much better than a lot of other series. So if Capcom wants to do an updated port for Code Veronica as opposed to a full-fledged remake, that works for me. But when it came to these OG re-releases on GOG, Capcom did the bare minimum. That was GOG making the heavy push. And as much as I do love GOG, it's but a fraction of the size of Steam. You can't get the original trilogy there, which is a bummer. Capcom put out a video on the road to Requiem giving a brief series summary. While short, it does a reasonable job of summarizing key points. I mean, to say the series lore is a mess is an understatement of the century, especially when you add remakes to the fold. Which again, I give props to 7 for keeping things more self-contained before tying it to the world at large near the end. But the video does gloss over several elements that felt more like they were ignoring various titles in the series. Maybe it's only me feeling that, but go give it a watch and see what you think and let me know. Capcom, be proud of what you've done with the series. Yes, you've had missteps along the way. Don't ignore your past. I'm not saying you need to re-release every single game in the franchise for modern systems. You've done a decent job with the mainline titles, but when it comes to those remakes, make it easy to access the original. Let them stand on their own, and let the remakes stand on their own. And no more remakes going forward. But for moving the series forward after Requiem, keep to the horror focus, the looping level design, heavy resource management, bring back spin-offs into the fold. And no, not only multiplayer ones. If you want to get more experimental with action elements, other mechanics, that's a good spot for them. It's also a good spot to bring back characters we haven't seen in a while. Don't go open world, that loses the core of what makes the series work. If you must try that, keep it to a spin-off. Don't get into live service territory. I know it's tempting. I know the IP's name could draw moths to a flame, or you could end up with a 3-figure player count in weeks like so many others who try this approach. You'll lose plenty of goodwill in the process that's hard to put a price on, but will impact your bottom line in more ways than one. I know all those means of nickel and diming customers is tempting. You're guilty of it yourself, if not as egregious as others in the industry. But heed not into temptation. You have something good going on here sales-wise. Don't muck it up. keep to the series' strengths. Don't be afraid to experiment, but don't go chasing trends. Else you may find yourself needing to do a major reboot again to get things back on track. There have been plenty of issues with the RE Engine era of Resident Evil. Many I pointed out in this video, but it's also no place that other game series would kill to be in. It's a great example of a series returning more to its roots at the right time. As much as I can enjoy that action-heavier era, it did get about as far away from the series' roots. While they haven't hit every entry out of the park, and the heavy focus on remakes grows wearisome, there's still much to enjoy with the modern Resident Evil series. When you look at how many large IPs have lost their ways in recent years, it's nice to see one buck the trend. By no means perfect, but they're on a much better course than others. Whether they keep that up, well, Requiem will give us a better idea of what to expect moving forward. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you haven't done so. Curious to hear your thoughts in the comments, how you rank the RE Engine titles, your thoughts on Requiem and the future of the series, thoughts on remakes, released or rumored. Special shout out to the Boulder Punchers who give extra support to the channel on Patreon or YouTube memberships. Those in the complete global saturation tier, American Boot, Flan Nagel. For those in the thank you for your patronage tier, Tom Terrible. For those in the now this is Boulder punching tier, Ethan, the Madman in Waco, James Warner, Cray, Korean characters that Vegas Pro won't show but translates to Netu, the original Narcissus Diet Thickdo TM Neo Edition. For those in the Jill Sandwich tier, On Hell, Benji, Benny Winterdawn, BBF in Bloxburg, Darkrod99, Dragonfang Studios, Extraordinary 2, James Kilgore, Leonard Aronson, Logan Lepin, Mad Morpheus Gaming, Michael Walters, Nico Pero, Sam Jones, Squid Vicious, Strababanya, Will Han, and Zin. Now for the post-video Q&A, so those in the Jill Sandwich tier and above can ask questions, starting with Flan Nagel. Do you think RE4's original supernatural approach would have worked, and is there room for the supernatural given the franchise's heavier focus on sci-fi? Yes, this approach could have worked. Not the series' forte, but what we did see looked promising. Could they have kept it up over the course of an entire game? I'm not sure about that. As far as there being room for it in the series, sprinkled throughout here and there it could work. House Beneviento and Village being a great example of that. You could see elements of that older version of 4 popping up throughout there. But to go as its sheer focus, spin-off, maybe, but again, I think it works best in small doses for Resident Evil. Thank you Flan Nagel for the question. From Extraordinary 2, do you think with the addition of Requiem that Resident Evil is going back to its horror roots? As mentioned earlier in the video, sure looks like it. They talked about one of those developer diaries of bumping up the horror again. Thing is, will they front load the horror and ease up as the game goes on? I guess we'll have to wait and see. As mentioned earlier, they made the conscious effort of reducing the horror in Village. But then they threw us for a loop with the House Beneviento section. But what they've shown so far and discussed, it does seem that way. So thanks for the question, Extraordinary 2. Dragonfang Studios have a few questions here. What would you say your number one boss encounter is and the reason why? Do you think they would allow players to control the zombies in online, this being a Resident Evil game? Do you think if this happens in real life, what percentage of the world would fall during the outbreak? So for the boss question, hard to narrow down to one, so I will do a handful that pop to mind. Sword Saint Ishin from Sekiro. To me, it's the best example, the final boss being the game's final exam for you as the player. Took many tries, but never felt frustrating, like Elden Ring. Getting better encounter by encounter, learning his moveset, and it was a blast. When I got to that final phase, I beat him on the first try with that. I love how the encounter takes place in the field where you lost your arm at the beginning of the game. Goes to show how far you've come since. And never forget, hesitation is defeat. I keep the game installed on my computer and fire up every once in a while just to fight them. On that note of final bosses being the final exam, same case goes for the final Virgil fight in Devil May Cry 3. While she's not the game's final boss, the last fight against Jean and Bayonetta, one of my favorites. Such a bummer they tucked that fight behind the Space Harrier minigame section that feels like it will never end. Another great final exam boss would be the final Colossus in Shadow of the Colossus. I can't think of any game really that does scale better than that game. The build-up of the fight itself, the journey you've been through, the long climb up is sheer bliss. As well, the 13th Colossus, the giant flying one, has such a sense of scope and size. Blows my mind how much they pushed the PS2 to its breaking point. Less on the mechanics, and more the presentation of its whole, the final fight against Kefka from Final Fantasy VI. Dancing Mad, that's the song title that plays, is Nobu's best work. Far better than One Winged Angel. Very overrated song. I do like One Winged Angel, but very, very overrated. The song's way better. The way you make your way up the Statue of the Gods one by one until you reach Kefka, amazing stuff. One of my favorite gaming tropes is using music from the game's title screen at a key moment. So, Mass Effect did this during the conversation with the Vigil AI. Elden Ring used the title screen during the fight against Radigan. But this moment, where Kefka descends and that one track plays from the game's title screen, best use of it. There's a video on YouTube where someone plays the song in a huge church organ. That bit there sounds like the gates of hell opening. So those are the ones that pop to mind. Next question, do you think they would allow players to control the zombies in online? Again, reference to the Resident Evil games, you kind of already can, in a way. You could do so in the Outbreak games if you get infected. You don't have a lot of control, but you still do a bit. Operation Raccoon City kinda did. Well, I mean, your character would turn, but you can't control them. I don't think having giving you the ability to outright control a zombie would be that much fun, unless they were like a faster one. But having your character infected and becoming one, I do find works better, so it's something the series has done. Who knows what they have on plans when it comes to future multiplayer titles, because they're going to still keep coming. Again, please Capcom, go more back to single-player spin-offs for the series. And do you think if this happens in real life, what percentage of the world would fall during the outbreak? 98.23%. So thanks for the questions, Dragon Fang Studio. And from Strabambanya, what made you decide to become a reviewer on YouTube? At the time, it was boredom. I watched various videos and thought, why don't I try that out? Very much a learning process. First video was not great. First video I did was on mini-maps. If you go watch those first few reviews, I did also pitch my voice down a bit for whatever reason. I felt probably self-conscious of my voice at the time. Everyone does that, but I don't know why I did that. But it's funny to look back on it and listen to. I won't, but if you want to, go for it. The channel was all over the place for a while. It really felt like once I did the Resident Evil 7 video, which is still my best performing video, I kind of got it on track. It was interesting to also read through the scripts of the RE Engine games I did for this video, my thoughts on them, what I covered, what I focused on, what I didn't focus on, how I do so in a different way now. And at the time, I will mention, I think I mentioned in streams before, when it came to the name Boulder Punch, it was a name that was available, which still surprises me that that name was available on YouTube. And it was always this moment that stood out to me. And seeing as I cover, that turned out, of course, to be a good thing, because I did have other names in mind. One being This Guy or Sick, infamous mistranslation from Final Fantasy VII, the OG one. There's also Train Suplex, a reference to Final Fantasy VI, where as Sabin, you could suplex a running train. I also thought about 61 Scissors as the channel name, a reference to Metal Gear Solid 2. You have the conversation with the Colonel AI at the end, he mentions it. So yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell about that. So thank you, Strabambanya, along with everyone else for the questions. Again, if you're interested in supporting the channel through Patreon or YouTube memberships, check the pinned comment or description. You could do one-time donations through Super Thanks or Ko-fi. Thanks again. See you in the next video.
A fucking pocket knife?